This episode is brought to you by Hasa. Liquid is clearly better. Liquid chlorine is the highest purity, works immediately, has no added cyanuric acid or calcium, and it will leave your pool safe, clean, and clear. And by the bottom feeder professional grade battery powered vacuum system. It sucks to clean pools, so cleaning pools sucks less. Get $100 off with code DVB100.
This episode is brought to you by Skimmer, the #1 pool service software in North America. With Skimmer, you can streamline your schedule, grow your revenue, and keep your customers coming back with 5-star service. Whether you're a one-person operation or an established team, Skimmer is your partner in success. Visit getskimmer.com/poolguy to try Skimmer for free for 30 days.
The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show.
Hi, welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I'm going to go over Hypo with you, and I'm going to talk to you about calcium hypochlorite and ways to use it in your pool, and some cautions, of course. Different aspects of Hypo. It's a really popular chlorine type, and I think you're going to learn a lot more by just me focusing on it, unpacking it here in today's podcast. Are you a pool service pro looking to take your business to the next level? Join the Pool Guy Coaching Program. Get expert advice, business tips, exclusive content, and get direct support from me. I'm a 35-year veteran in the industry. Whether you're starting out or scaling up, I've got the tools to help you succeed. Learn more at swimmingpoollearning.com. I'll start with the typical percentage that you're going to get the Hypo in. Now, typically for the pro use, when you go to your supplier, they're going to have 73% Hypo. Sometimes you get even higher, 78%. If you go to like Walmart or Home Depot, you may get Hypo in the 65% range. And this is more or less the strength of the product versus by the weight. So in other words, the Hypo at a higher percentage is a much stronger product than if it was at a 65% available chlorine. And that's important to note because if you're kind of comparing one chlorine type to another, typically you would want, I use liquid chlorine as kind of like my baseline comparison, even though liquid chlorine is a liquid form. And I'm going off of the strongest form of liquid chlorine that you can purchase, which is 12.5%. And of course, this is what the pros use out there for their route. So if you wanted to compare the 12.5% liquid chlorine to Hypo by weight, it equals about 22 ounces of Hypo at 73% strength active chlorine to equate to 1 full gallon of liquid chlorine. And this is a liquid, of course, formula mixed with a dry formula to get this equation. And so the liquid chlorine, of course, if you're doing it by comparing it by 1 gallon of liquid chlorine versus a 1 pound bag of Hypo, liquid chlorine, of course, is a little bit stronger. And if you're using a bucket of Hypo, you can easily add 22 ounces to a pool to match the strength of liquid chlorine. So if you're just comparing it side by side, of course, liquid chlorine is a little bit more potent than the Hypo, but it's not something that's a deal breaker. So that's why a lot of pool pros like using Hypo, because it's pretty equal in strength to liquid chlorine. Not quite equal, but close enough that we use it out in the field. And we usually use 1 pound of Hypo to kind of equate with 1 gallon of liquid chlorine at 12.5%. Even though I just said it's not exactly that weight, it's pretty close to it. And so a lot of pool pros, old school guys like me, still use a 1 pound of Hypo to 1 gallon of liquid chlorine. And Hypo is, of course, easier to carry because it's a powdered form, and it's a pretty good shock to use in the pool to bring the chlorine level up to a higher level rapidly. I'll throw in a caution here, and I think this is a really important caution, that you can't mix Hypo directly with trichlor, dichlor, because those products have what we call cyanuric acid as one of their base elements, and the Hypo reacts very badly with trichlor and dichlor with the cyanuric acid in those chlorine types. It's actually an explosive reaction. So if you're using Hypo tablets, and they design these Hypo tablets so that they don't look like regular trichlor tablets. The ones that I use are shaped like an octagon, shaped tablet and or hexagon or whatever. They're shaped they're not round, I should say, in a lot of cases, because they want to distinguish themselves from trichlor. Because if you put a Cal-Hypo tablet in a trichlor feeder with trichlor residue on the side of it, chances are that could explode, or is more than likely to explode. If you have a trichlor tablet in a skimmer, which is not recommended, and you pour a bag of Cal-Hypo over that, and the pool is not running at that time, and you put the skimmer lid back on, I can almost guarantee there's going to be an explosion within a minute or two with that kind of combination. You don't want to get a bucket, of course, and mix dichlor and Cal-Hypo together, because then you have a potential for an explosion. So it does react very negatively, I should say, with trichlor and dichlor. Something else that you should be aware of is that every chlorine product, or everything in nature, so to say, has a byproduct, a waste part of the product. So with Cal-Hypo, of course, calcium is in the name of the product, and calcium hypochlorite adds calcium to the pool water when you're using it as a sanitizer. Liquid chlorine will add salt, trichlor and dichlor add cyanuric acid, and it just depends on your area of what you really think about adding calcium to the pool. If you're like in my area of California, where most of the calcium hardness levels in your pools are 400 or 500 parts per million, you probably want to use Cal-Hypo sparingly or cautiously, because it does add calcium to the water. But if you're in parts of Florida or parts of Texas, maybe where the hardness is at 200, using Cal-Hypo is not a big deal. And you can always partially drain the water to bring the calcium levels down. So to me, it's not a deal breaker either to use Cal-Hypo in an area where you have high calcium hardness. I prefer liquid chlorine in those areas because you're not adding any calcium to the pool water. But Cal-Hypo is great for most regions, and it's okay to have a bag or two on your truck in Southern California and use it as a way to shock a pool on occasion. I like the convenience of it, getting it in the 1 pound bags, because I don't have to carry back a lot of chemicals, and it's something that's super easy to use, and it's something that's lightweight basically compared to a gallon of liquid chlorine that you're bringing back there. So there are some advantages to using it, but it does add calcium to the water. And how much calcium? Roughly about 7 parts per million of calcium for every 10 parts per million of chlorine in a 10,000 gallon body of water. So it does add some calcium to the pool. The larger the body of water, of course, the less effect it's going to have. The smaller body of water, the more calcium that's being added to it. Cal-Hypo will also raise the pH slightly in a pool, depending on how much you use. If you throw in 3 or 4 pounds of it, it'll raise the pH more than if you use 1 pound of it. So basically, the pH of the Cal-Hypo is about 11 or 12, and this is going to raise the pH slightly. Temporarily, I think, in most cases, unless you use a large dose of Cal-Hypo. I'll throw in another caution here, and that's how you apply it to a pool. Now, if you're putting it in a vinyl or a pool that has, well, vinyl is probably the one that you have to worry about the most. I wouldn't worry too much about a fiberglass pool, but again, you wouldn't want to be pouring it directly on the surface of a fiberglass or a vinyl pool, especially a vinyl pool, because the Cal-Hypo will, and I'll say this again, the Cal-Hypo will bleach out any vinyl pool liner almost immediately when it touches the surface of the vinyl pool liner. It doesn't dissolve quick enough in a lot of cases not to affect the vinyl liner of the pool. So you never want to use Cal-Hypo directly on a vinyl lined pool. If you're going to use Cal-Hypo, I suggest you have the pool running for an 8-hour cycle, and then you would pour the Cal-Hypo directly into the skimmer, and that way it's not going to touch the surface of the pool. Or you can dissolve it in a bucket, which again is not fail-safe. And to err on the side of caution, I would suggest using liquid chlorine only in a vinyl pool so that you don't have the potential of ever staining that vinyl pool. Fiberglass is usually not a problem, but there are some fiberglass that are different colors, and so I would be cautious of using Cal-Hypo directly, broadcasting it directly onto a fiberglass surface as well as a vinyl pool surface. You can broadcast it onto a plaster pool, PebbleTech pool, with no side effect in that regards. So I definitely would say you got to be careful of which pool surface type you're applying the Cal-Hypo to, just to be safe and you're not going to stain or permanently damage the vinyl liner of a pool. And the Pool Guy Podcast Show has teamed up with UPA to bring you affordable, reliable liability insurance starting at just $64 a month. Get up to $2 million in coverage, and the members of my coaching group get an even lower rate. Protect your business and your peace of mind. Sign up with UPA today by clicking the link in the podcast description. I don't want to sound like I'm giving too many cautions here, but if you do broadcast it in a plaster or pebble-type pool, note that it's a very strong oxidizer. So unlike liquid chlorine and even dichlor, the oxidation part of Cal Hypo is really strong, which means that if you have copper in the pool, if you're using a pool RX, if you have a copper algicide or the pool has an elevated copper level, there's a good chance that when the Cal Hypo touches the surface of the pool, it's going to cause a black stain to form. It's quite temporary. There's ways to eliminate it. Of course, when the oxidation level drops down, the stain will start to disappear. But it is pretty scary and frightening to see a black stain appear in a white plaster pool immediately after pouring Cal Hypo onto the surface of it. There's a whole scientific thing that happens with it, but since it's a strong oxidizer, the metals react to it, copper especially, causing that black stain in the pool. So just be aware of that as well, that if you have a pool with an elevated copper level, or if you have a pool with a pool RX in it that you just put in there and the minerals are still dissolving, that could be a potential problem with the Cal Hypo. I always say I err on the side of caution, and if you are going to add it to a pool, you can mix it in a bucket, or if you have the pool running for 6 to 8 hours, you can actually put it through the skimmer safely and it'll broadcast it into the pool with no problem. Cal Hypo is also what we would call an unstabilized chlorine type, which means that there is nothing protecting it from the sun's UV rays. So if you're using Cal Hypo in a pool as your primary shock, just be aware that the cyanuric acid level has to be at a level that's going to protect it. So if you're not using trichlor tablets or dichlor, you're going to have to add a cyanuric acid product to the pool to bring it up to at least, I would say, a safe cyanuric acid level for a Cal Hypo pool would be about 50 parts per million. I wouldn't say 30 parts per million would necessarily do it. I like 50 parts per million, or maybe even higher, 60 or 70 parts per million, so that way you're able to protect the chlorine in the pool from being burned off rapidly with the sun's UV rays. Of course, it's going to burn off eventually, and it's not something that is slow dissolving like trichlor tablets, and I'll touch on the Cal Hypo tablets in 1 second here. And so when you put it in there, it's much like using liquid chlorine. So if you're shocking a pool with Cal Hypo, kind of just use the same things you would use with liquid chlorine, which means that the cyanuric acid level has to be at a certain point for it to be effective. And it's something to consider that it's not a stabilized chlorine. So if you're using it all week long as your primary sanitizer, you have to add it maybe a few times during the week if you want it to be effective, because again, it doesn't really stay in the pool like a slow dissolving trichlor tablet. However, they do make Cal Hypo tablets. They're about price equal pound for pound as a bucket of trichlor tablets. But in my field testing, you're going to need more Cal Hypo tablets to equal what you would get with trichlor tablets. It's not a matter of the strength of the product necessarily. It's that the trichlor tablets are a different product altogether, and the trichlor tablets are a very potent form of chlorine, and it's one of those things where the trichlor tablets aren't as strong as, in my testing again, as the trichlor tablets. So if you're using 3 trichlor tablets in a pool, let's say you have a 25,000 gallon pool and you're using 3 trichlor tablets, you would have to use 5 or 6 Cal Hypo tablets of the same weight in ounces to equal the chlorine output necessary in that pool. Again, this is my field testing. It may be different for you, but I found that you're going to need more Cal Hypo tablets than you are going to need trichlor tablets. Ounce for ounce, the trichlor tablets are a much stronger chlorine in my opinion. Also, since unless you're using a Cal Hypo feeder, they make specific feeders for Cal Hypo tablets, and they have to have a lot of flow going over them. So you can't use a trichlor feeder. Even if it's a brand new trichlor feeder, it's not going to work, because the way the trichlor feeder works is that a small amount of water goes in there and a small amount of trichlor is released. For Cal Hypo tablets to dissolve properly, a lot of water needs to flow over them for this to happen. And so a lot of times you're putting the Cal Hypo tablets directly into the skimmer basket, letting the water from the skimmer dissolve these tablets. Now, one problem you're going to run into if you don't have a dedicated feeder, I should say, which most people don't have a dedicated feeder for the Cal Hypo tablets, is that in really warm areas like Las Vegas and Arizona, where the water gets to 85 or 90 degrees, you'll find that the Cal Hypo tablets are going to dissolve much faster than what you would want them to dissolve at. In other words, the rate that they're going to dissolve in the pool will accelerate to a point where it doesn't really make sense to use them as a weekly slow dissolving sanitizer, because in 2 days, the whole Cal Hypo tablets that you put in there have been completely dissolved, where in areas like my area in California, where the water temperature is in the 70s usually in the summer, you'll have these Cal Hypo tablets dissolving over the course of 7 days without any problems. Now, you can do some things like put them in a Ziploc bag with holes in it to kind of reduce the amount they dissolve in the pool. But ultimately, in warmer climates in the summertime, the Cal Hypo tablets may not last an entire week dissolving in the skimmer. So just be aware of that limitation, that since they are dissolving and there's more water passing over them, the warmer the water, the faster they'll dissolve, and it may not be practical to use them in place of trichlor tablets. The reason why people like the Cal Hypo tablets is that, again, they don't have any cyanuric acid in them, so you're not adding any cyanuric acid to the water by using Cal Hypo tablets. So I really do like Cal Hypo. I like using it as a shock for pools. Maybe not necessarily the primary shock, but I do like the convenience of it. I also like leaving a bucket of it at a customer's home if they're a heavy use chlorine pool. I like selling them a 25 or 50 pound bucket and leaving it at the service account by their equipment, and the customer buys that bucket, and I'll supplement my maintenance dose of chlorine with that. So they're really great way to have chlorine at the job site. That's a great benefit of the Cal Hypo because it's in a powdered form and they sell it in these 25 or 50 pound buckets. And I also like the Cal Hypo tablets, knowing the limitation in hot water or warmer water. Even so, in Southern California, they're perfectly fine. And I would say probably parts of Florida, some parts of other states, you're not going to have them dissolving rapidly. But again, I caution you, in those warmer states where the water gets into the 90s and high 80s all the time, that the Cal Hypo tablets may not be a direct replacement for trichlor tablets in that case. But, in the chemical itself, I've been using it ever since I was in the industry, and I like Cal Hypo. I think it's a great shock with, again, the byproduct of calcium being added to the water, but it is a potent chlorine that's highly effective. One thing I should say that I like using it for, I like using the granular Cal Hypo. We have pretty aggressive green algae nodules here. They look almost like black algae, and usually they're in Pebble Tech pools, and it may just be area specific, but we get them here in my area of California. So they have little heads like the black algae, but they're not black algae. They're actually a green type of algae, and I like putting it on top of it and turning the pool off and letting it set on top. It seems to be highly effective. I would normally use, of course, the algae band, the granular trichlor, but in a Pebble Tech pool that does have a potential of staining and damaging the pebbles. Also in a colored plaster pool, it's not as effective. So for this aggressive green algae, the little heads that are in the pebbles, the Cal Hypo works great. And I also have successfully used Cal Hypo tablets in a pool where the algae is forming on the step area, and even though I brush it aggressively, I just can't dislodge the algae. You probably experienced this before. It kind of gets into the corner of a step, and there's just no way to dislodge it. So what I do is I take a Cal Hypo tablet, and I break it up into pieces, and then I'll sprinkle the large chunks onto the step area where the algae's at, and it takes it off right away. Like, a day later, you go back there, and the algae is completely gone. So it does have a pretty good effect on algae in areas where other chlorines may be ineffective. The fact that the tablet is slow dissolving, if you put it over the algae itself, it seems to be highly effective. In fact, I even told the manufacturer to make a granular Cal Hypo that's a little bit thicker. I don't know if thicker is the right word, but heavier, and that dissolves slower. And you can use that in place of the granular trichlor because it would be a lot safer than using granular trichlor. In fact, if you're using Algae or granular trichlor in pools and you're feeling nervous about it, you may want to just grind up or break up a Cal Hypo tablet and use that as kind of the substitute for the trichlor granular. I've found it to be really effective, and of course I caution you using it on a vinyl pool. It will stain the pool just as the granular Cal Hypo will stain that pool. Looking for other podcasts, you can find those on my website, swimmingpoollearning.com. If you're looking for my coaching program, you can also find that by going to poolguycoaching.com. And if you're interested in any other resources, my website's a great place for that. And swimmingpoollearning.com is a website. Thank you for listening. Have a great week, and God bless. This episode is brought to you by HASA, providing products that deliver clean, healthy water for every aspect of everyday life. The bottom feeder battery-powered vacuum system, portable, powerful, and only weighs 12 pounds. And Skimmer. Get Skimmer, America's #1 pool service software. Podcast listeners can try Skimmer for free at getskimmer.com/poolguy.